How do you decide on that critical level of stuff that you keep in the house?
Comes in batch sizes.
Hmm?
Comes in batch sizes. And then
So how many pickles do you get?
when you die. It's smaller.
Prior knowledge,
Hmm?
you assume how much you're going to use before it goes bad.
Okay. So there is that thing, but if you didn't, see, there is a disconnect from common sense at home and common sense at work. Because it's not my money. How many of you turn up or down your heating system at home? My kids. And then Nina and I go, you know. But at work, when we were in an older building, I had people in offices running heaters and air conditions at the same time in that room. So we are forced to think, whether we have the technical ability or the education behind it, but we're forced to think because I am engaged, but typically I'm not. So what I'm thinking here, this means, correct me, see Jeremy if I'm thinking correctly, that level of inventory, that critical inventory, that helps me understand the amount of resources I need to put into a process is equal to this thing that's very hard to find, which is the what? The bottleneck times the raw processing time. So let's see. This is not a real problem. This is a made-up problem. Again, this is in your book, so as you read it, you'll become familiar. It's the penny fab problem. There are 4 processes on a penny fab: a punch press, cuts penny blanks, stamps, Lincoln's face, places a rim on the penny, and cleans away any of the burrs. Now, amazingly, I visited a facility that actually makes these, and it's in Tennessee. 4 identical tools in series. Each takes 2 hours per piece. And again, this is very, very important because that is not true in any process, that there is no variability. So it's like robots running stuff. I want you to tell me what you think these are. Okay, I'm not going to tell you that. I want to show it to you in a minute. But I want just you to look at the process. So I got 4 things, right? They're in line. They seem to have no variability. Everything is perfect in life. And it takes 2 hours per piece. Could you tell me anything about what is it that we're trying to find? Remember when I said the Toyota production system reduced lead time and I pulled it back up and pulled it back up and pulled it back up? What was the 2 things Lean tries to get rid of? Material and people. So this seems to be related to the material part. What does that mean? I'm going to talk while you talk. I didn't want Enrique to drive up here and not have the ability to teach. Don't tell them. Let them tell you. Let them tell you.
Okay. So we're going to assume that we have the pennies coming in, and each processing time here, 2 hours, 2 hours, 2 hours. 2 hours. So the question here, the since it's a balance line, all the things come in and flow without any disruptions, and it says no variability. So what is the rate of production that we have here per hour? Since it takes a penny to be produced, 1 penny every 2 hours, that equals 2.5 pennies per hour. So, can I delete this? Based on that, I mean, pretty much everything else is very straightforward. The throughput to get 1 penny from here all the way to here is just the addition of those numbers. So, and I know this is very simple calculation, but I'm doing it this way so that it makes clear, because the examples down the way get a little bit more tricky. So that's the throughput. Then the equation says that critical whip is what? This times this, which is 4 pennies. What does that mean? At any given time, the streamline process, 2 hours each, how many pennies are we going to look at in there? 1 at each station. So that's pretty much what it means. The reason for that is basically, this is related to the Little's law, by the way. But we're going to have other calculations down the road into how the relationship shifts, because we have best case, worst case, and the thing is, we are assuming this is balanced, no variation, and we're releasing only 1 penny to the production line, and one thing moves until the next is done. But if we change policies, that's, I believe, here.
So that RCB is considered the bottleneck rate?
Yeah. That's the bottleneck rate. So critical whip, throughput, and bottleneck rate. Okay. So this is the real, these are the real numbers for the fabrication. So instead of having 2 hours, we have 5 hours in the second station, 10 hours in the third, and 3 hours in the last one. So with those numbers there, number of machines we have, process time per hour, what is the jobs per hour capacity that we can have? Something like this. I'll let you want me to go on, or let them calculate the rest?
Yeah, let me calculate the rest.
So calculate everything, and then the same numbers at the bottom.
Give them one more. Give them the next one.
Okay.
There. Now you should be able to hear it.
Yeah, he sent us schedule, we can discuss the schedule. 276. So, but some of them are just on locations. I'm going one by one. Yeah, some already, I mean, I've been posting the offers to the ones at 10%. And some of them have been accepting the offers. There's only one that has declined the offer. So, I'm hoping to be done in 1 week delay.
All right. I don't know what Enrique did. So I don't know where these numbers are coming from. Enrique, I'm not sure where I know what these numbers mean.
What is this number? No, not this one right here, this one right here. How do I mean, what is that? What's 0.5?
Shane's the
I mean, it's calculated.
0.5 is the number of jobs I can get done in a given period of time. Is that correct? Is that so? You don't have to memorize these equations or anything like that. You simply look at what in your mind? The number of jobs I can get done in 10 minutes, half an hour, hour, shift, whatever it is that you want. So if I could figure this out, and we could kind of get this, again, realizing sometimes it's really tough. Because what is it that you have to do in manufacturing or a production environment to get this number is what? Not that different. Can you imagine getting those numbers in an office environment? That's your challenge. The equation is not your challenge. The challenge is to get the right information into this process so that you can determine. So let's assume that that's the case. So that's, I can produce 0.5, I can produce 0.4, I can produce 0.6, I can produce 0.67. And therefore, when I look at this, what is my bottleneck? The slowest rate, isn't it? So that becomes what? Your R sub B. That's your bottleneck. Now, I'm not understanding what T0 was. Could you remind me again what T0 was? Raw processing time. It's not the amount of time that it takes me. It's just how, when I sit down and do something, how long does that take? And accordingly, this is 2, 5, 7, 10, 10 plus 10 is the raw processing time is 20. Okay? So, are you trying to tell me that if I could find the raw bottleneck and I can multiply it by the raw processing time, I get this number 8. What does this 8 mean? What does this 8 mean? 8 means that based on the fact that life is perfect, which is not, that if you were to get a guideline of how much resources should we have in this system, that does what? That does what? That increases, makes my boss happy because what? I have high throughput. My God, you know, this month we produced 26,000 documents. Ooh, yeah, good job, good job, good job. At the same time, we said reduce lead time. Principle number 3 was what? Enhance the quality of life. What was the second term in there? Minimum cycle time. Who does cycle time? You are doing cycle time. So if I can reduce your work and increase my output, watch this. Principle number 1. Principle number 3. I can connect those two together because I need to understand what is the amount. Now, if life is not perfect, I can make this 9, or I can make this 7, or I can make it 10, but it is a systematic judgment where a majority of the companies right now are doing what? How do you manage your inventory? Tell me.
It costs less if you buy more. So just buy a bunch and throw them somewhere until you need them.
But what if you don't need them?
Don't manage it.
And the people that have to keep them stored suffer.
So I'm going to pay people to store it. Then I'm going to have to do whatever the stuff is that you make it ready for sale, because you just can't take something and say, hey, we're going to sell this. There is a process, isn't it, to be able to do it. So you incur not only that you've spent a ton of money, you're spending ton of money managing ton of stuff that you don't need. And then you are the one that are judging the fact that the government doesn't want to work well. I'm being mean. It's not that the university is any different. You could say the state government rather than the federal government. How could you do that? How can we have a group of citizens managing the highest priority assets of the nation, not aware of what is a good process and what is a bad process, and spending money, and now I'm being facetious, spending money on things that they don't need to spend money on, and then complaining that it costs a lot. Right? This is not, any equation in the world does not define, it's an infinite wisdom, the decision that you need to make. But it gives you a benchmark or a baseline to say, hey, this says 8. We got 8,000. Now there's a problem. And therefore, what we want to show here is this right here. Anything you want to show this? He's going to show you how, again, what are you going to see? What you're going to see is we're going to start with one piece coming through. We're going to see 2 pieces coming through, and then 3 pieces coming through, then 4 pieces coming through. So as I batch stuff, remember we talked about batching? Batching not? You're going to see that. And you're going to see how that batching is going to impact what? All of the 3 metrics that we just discussed. Go ahead.
So basically here what we have is the time, and we have the number of pennies that we're going to have at each station at any given moment. So with whip of 1, it means at any given moment in the whole line, we're just going to have 1 penny. Okay? So we're looking, just look at the first row, that's where it starts. So we have time 0, 1 penny, nothing in the other 3. Time 2, 1 penny in the station 2, and nothing in the rest, and so on. So we get through here, it's out, so we get 1 more penny coming in. So when did we have the other penny here coming in at time 8, that's what we had over there. All right?
Can I ask you this, because he's gonna show you 2, 3, and 4, right?
Yeah.
Do you think by your intuition that I can increase the efficiency of this line?
Yes.
Because as the penny goes from that first column to the second column, can't I put another, what, penny into the first column? So in your mind, what would be the right amount of pennies to come through the system? That means 1 penny in 1, 1 penny in 2, 1 penny in 3, 1 penny in 4. Intuition tells you what? Watch this.
So, if we do that, this is what happens. We're introducing the second penny right here. So, here's the thing. We're releasing batch of 2, right? So that in any given moment, we can have 2 pennies in the line. So one is here in the first, the other has to wait before it gets in the process. Once this one moves at time 2 to the second station, the other one enters to the first station. So at any given moment, we're gonna have constant whip of 2. What happens when this leaves? Then another one comes in. All right? So there should be one more waiting here. This one leaves, the other one waiting comes in here, and so on. All right?
3 is
So-
okay? 3 is okay? So you know what 3 looks like, right? Okay, just one.
We can just jump.
No, just, I want to get the thing. 3 is okay, right?
Yeah.
You think 4 is optimal. What about 5? What would happen if there were 5 things?
You have to wait.
What's that?
You're gonna increase the waiting time because you're gonna.
It's going to increase the waiting time. Therefore, if it is going to increase the waiting time, what do you think it's going to increase? The cycle time. Now, as I go from 1 to 2, did I increase my throughput, the number of units produced? As I go to 3, did I increase it? As I go to 4, did I increase it? Okay? I increased it without increasing what? The cycle time. As I go to 5, what do you think is going to happen? My throughput, my cycle time is going to happen what? What's going to happen to my cycle time? Am I going to have any more throughput? Oh my God, what is happening? Go ahead.
So here's the calculations of exactly what Dr. Sonny was saying. The throughput here, we have the total raw processing time of 8. We get only 1 unit of whip, so 1 divided by 8, 0.125, right? The cycle time, still 8, right? As we move down, we get to throughput of 4 units of whip divided by 8, the cycle time. So we get that. If we introduce that 5th unit, there it is. Cycle time to get the whole 5 pennies through, it's going to increase by 2, the 2 extra hours. But the throughput is still the same because there's only 4 stations and we can only process those at that time, right? So I guess the next question would be, what happens if we go to 6? What changes if we go to 6? So what doesn't change? And the throughput is determining the capacity of the line, right?
Where did that equation, 1/8, where did that, calculation come from? That is your Little's Law. Remember Little's Law? So I just didn't want you to lose it and say, oh my God,
what are we doing? What was Little's law? Amount of inventory divided by cycle time. Cycle time was what? 82228, right? So if I use the Little's law, that's where my throughput is coming in. That means I'm going to get 0.125, 0.25, 0.375, 0.5. But after a certain period of time, irregardless what I do, I can increase all the inventory I want. I'm not going to produce anymore. But what is going to happen is I am going to shoot myself in the foot because now I'm increasing my cycle time. And as I've increased my cycle time, it's going to be harder for me to be able to justify my productivity based on the amount of resources that I've used.
Well, once you establish the critical width, don't you know that's your,
That is correct. Now, again, remember one thing. Life is not so simple as a slide. What assumption did I make? I made an assumption of no variability. You know, on your everyday life, you got variability. So I'm not going to say, please don't use W0 as your critical width. I say, use common sense to modify that and use that as a basis for thinking. So if I go from 8 to 10, may not be a bad thing. 8 to 8,000 may be an extremely bad thing.
I guess to support Dr. Sani's point in here, if you remember that simulation we looked at a couple of weeks ago where the people was coming in and out, there was some bar right down there, if you want to play with it, that said how much variation do you want to introduce into the system. So if the variation is 0, then the numbers will give exactly this. But if we increase variation, then we needed to wait some time until the curve reached a certain threshold where it gets closer to what the simple calculations give us here.
So you say, oh my God, we spent all Friday morning listening to lean. Nothing makes sense until you take something back to your office in your way you think. You're now aware of what? Bottleneck. You're aware of raw processing time, and you're aware that a simple calculation can show you if you have too many resources in the process or not. Now, if you go and say my level of inventory is 500 pieces, and you look at 677 pieces, I wouldn't suggest you do anything about it. But if you say my level of inventory should be 500 to do this, then, and you go out and check that's 50,000 pieces there, then the issue becomes a very issue that is related to the person themselves. Should I create, what do you call it, waves? Do I create waves by saying, my God, all of this is messed up? Do you have that obligation to do that? If you do that, you're also going to be a target. Because someone says, who are you to tell me that? So, technical is one part. The culture. You are changing a culture that has not changed in a long time. If you take these little things in and start doing it and saying, well, you know, I took a course, and therefore, based on that course, I can tell you everything I need. Don't do that. Modify your thinking, make it very subtle, look and figure out what fights you need to fight. Fair enough? Go ahead.
How do you handle in an office environment where you're trying to look at how long it takes something to do? I've found that when I watch somebody do something, it's really accurate and it stays at the same amount of time, and then as soon as you walk away, that's when it varies.
I think in this case, now, if you were to say, how long does it take? Because it's raw processing time, you can go to somebody and say, hey, how long does it take you to write that document up? And what they tell you should be fairly accurate, okay? Now, when they're going to get to it, if they're going to get to it, whether they're going to do it correctly is another issue. So at this moment, this is difficult, but you can still get an estimate of how long it should take.
The last column is just to prove that the equation stands. You take WIP equals throughput by cycle time. So, and there you go. So now, the question here that we always bring up is, in this principle, if we're dealing with this class of lean manufacturing, what would be the ideal part that we would look for in regards to this relationship right here? If we go back to the example, what would be the lean processing here in all these calculations? Highlighted one, right? To some extent, we're producing based on capacity, assuming that the demand is for that amount of units. But this is where we're not creating waste, right here in time, and that we are getting the throughput that we should, right? Assuming that's the demand.
Enrique, can I add something more?
Yes.
So, Enrique is bringing up the fact that there's two ways to do something. One is that you look at the inventory and fix that level of inventory, and therefore if you fix the inventory, your throughput's going to go up. All right? Two is, what can you do from the first several weeks that we talked about? The other thing that you could do is to reduce that cycle time. What if that cycle time was 4? What would happen? Instead of 8, it's 4. What would happen to my throughput? Oh my God. So I have two mechanisms. I can fix the level of inventory and it's going to increase your throughput. Nobody thought about it. But in the Lego exercise, did you not do that? You increase your performance by reducing not the processing time. The processing time was still what? Putting the bases under the thing. What you reduced was the waiting time. So that's one. So I could look at it from that perspective, or I can create a level of efficiency in my production by reducing my cycle time. I have two options. I can do one, I can do two, or I can combine that strategy on how to do it. How would you choose your strategy? Your strategy is dependent upon what is the path of least resistance to get your first project done without being killed. Fair enough? Because people are not going to like you. You're telling them inherently that the process is messed up and to some extent it's their fault. How many times have somebody come to your office or to your area that has some expertise, subject matter expertise, and says, Jeremy, you're not doing this correctly. We should have done it this way. And when they leave, you say, that son of a... Well, that's what they're going to be saying about you. So you have to understand the subtleties of getting a project done without hurting a lot of people's feelings. Go ahead.
So basically the strategies that we can follow is to get a better throughput, either with a certain specific time that we cannot change. And we discussed this some time ago, that there are some processes that, regardless of what we do in removing waste, chemical processes or mechanical processes that have to take a specific amount of time, the raw processing time, as it says here, that we cannot change. So if that can change, what would be the strategy to increase throughput? That's the goal. We always want to make this larger. We want to increase throughput. So we have two options. Number one is either we increase, if the cycle time is something we cannot change, increase inventories. But then there's a red flag right there. What we have been saying all along the time. We can't have more inventories, and that's what happens here actually. What's going on in here? We can change the cycle time as we increase inventory. What happens to throughput? But there's only so much inventory we can increase, so we need to find that, theoretically speaking, so that we get to the point that we increase the throughput based on the current capacities. There are other things that we would need to look at the individual stages, but to increase throughput is either increase WIP, or the second alternative is what? Make the process faster, right? So from a lean perspective, this is the option we're looking for always.
All right. Hey, can I do one more thing on that thing, and maybe I'd be able to add it? Because I want to relate it. What is the purpose of ORNL, Rubbermaid, or White Well? What is your purpose of existence? To serve a certain need, requirements, and a certain customer. So we started this discussion by talking about probability, customer service level. What was customer service level? How do we define it? Probability that cycle time is that lead time.
Less than equal to the lead time.
Less than or equal to lead time, right? So here we're talking about cycle time and WIP. What if my lead time that I had allocated to this was 6? I'm just making a number up. You notice at the end you are here to serve what? The customer. So if I had 6, the probability that you're going to meet the customer's need is non-existent, and actually it becomes what? Worse. All right, so as I'm adding resources, my God, how is this possible? I'm adding resources, but I'm taking away from my ability to serve my customer. So let's make it easier. Let's say the customer service was, lead time was 8. 8 is less than or equal to things, so the customer service, let's say, is 100%. Next one is 100%, next one is 100%, next one. So by adding, going from 1 to 4, I've not touched my ability to meet my customer service. But when I watch out, what happens? Lead time is 8. What happened to my cycle time? Went to 10. I'm not able to meet my customer. 12, not able to meet my customer. 14. Is it possible that we can design systems in a manner by increasing the amount of spending that we do and shoot ourselves in the foot? Not only are you messing with the customer service level, somebody's going to eventually come down to you and say, my God, do you need 50,000 parts here to make 2 parts? Somebody's going to question that, I would assume. I know ORNL is focused on that. From what I understood from the leadership at Y12, cost and efficiency is now a top initiative. And Rubbermaid is in the private sector, so you have to deal with that every day. I think, don't you?
We make enough money per product that we don't really care.
Okay, I stand corrected.
I mean, in theory, we're supposed to, but we make enough to cover a lot of this up, so they don't really have to focus on it as much.
But what if you made a little bit more per product?
What if they gave you performance-based bonuses?
Are we okay? So when you leave this class, we're not done. When you leave this class, what do you have? Hey, there are some definitions, cycle time, lead time, right? You understand service level, that there's a relationship between that. Then you understand there's an equation called critical WIP, right? And I can calculate that, possibly. If I can calculate that, I can understand what is happening to my system. One, it tells me how much inventory do I have, but then it allows me to play around with that system and say, can I reduce inventory? Can I reduce cycle time? And if I did this, where is it that I can increase throughput, yet minimize what? Cycle time. And if I minimize my cycle time, I have done what? Reduce my inventory, but increase my customer service. And you see now, mathematically, it is starting to be put together. Now, mathematics does not always work. So you have to use your common sense as you go through this. Go ahead.
Quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
When you talk about pieces per hour, like at each station, what happens if you, I mean, the 1 penny is one thing, but what if you think we have the capability of doing like 6 pennies at each station? Does that change anything?
That changes.
Yeah, I mean, the whole concept would be taking 6 as the processing unit and moves forward. So it's an aggregation only, but the calculations would work in the same way. You just have 6 times more at each station.
Yeah.
And that affects the capacity.
But overall, your analysis, if you increase the same amount, your analysis would still be the same. The end result is going to be the same. Your numbers are going to be slightly different. Now, if you change capacities in the process differently, I had 2 machines here, but 4 here, but 3 here, but 6 here, then your analysis completely changes.
So, what the authors here did, basically, and a quick note, Spearman was a student of Dr. Garcia. If he tells you any stories
Oh,
about
does he?
him.
Is he?
Yeah, he was.
So when he says he was my student, just say, okay? Is that right? That's all you have to say.
So, we went through the whole thing here, and let's chart this as the ideal scenario. So that's why it's called best case. So the best case characteristics is we go through 4 stations, 2 hours at each station, so on and so forth. So we calculate the inventories on the x-axis and the y-axis is the throughput. All right? So we said that if we have 1 unit here, then this is going to be the throughput, 1.125, right? And then it goes linearly up until we reach this threshold right here, which was what? The 4 units of inventory, right? That's right here. And the bottleneck rate, that is right there. It doesn't go up.
Let me
Okay.
set the stage, Enrique. So what? We know a few things, and so it gives me a little bit of guidance. The part that I always thought that I struggled with is this question of by how much can a process be improved? How bad is my process, and how much can it be improved by? Do you struggle with that idea?
Kind of sensitivity analysis.
What if, based on this simple concept that was introduced, we put boundaries and say, this is the best that it could be, this is the worst that it could be, and this is what we would call okay or reasonable. What if that was provided to you for that process? Then it kind of gives you an idea of where your process is. And if your process is way off the chart, maybe that's when you say, I'll take a risk and I'll say something. Okay? But if it's in between, and you say, I just come to work and I want to go home and enjoy my weekend, don't say a word. So what he is showing you is just the graphing of what we do, but what could be the best case, what could be the worst case, and the practical what? Worst case.
So yeah, I think you know where this is going. Giving those thresholds, so the best case of what happens based on this particular scenario is here. Things can't go better than this. All right?
Because this was perfection, right? No variability. Everything's okay.
So it means that if any changes are introduced to that particular system, we would be looking somewhere around this area. But
That's-
what is that area?
That's like your wife, friend, telling you, I want you to look like Brad Pitt. That's the best you can do. All right? You may never get there, but that's the goal. Oh, what is this?
We are in the same, just we are charting against, instead of throughput, cycle time. So you see the same thing, 4 units here. After we reach the optimal capacity, we have a linear increase into the cycle time, right? So again, this is another chart. Best case. In this case, what are we aiming for? Throughput. Getting more throughput, right? And the ideal, based on what we said, is to get the most throughput as possible. So our direction here is up. We are bounded by this green line right there. So it means, based on these circumstances, that we cannot go beyond that. So we are looking to analyze that region under the green line. In the case of cycle time, what's the direction that we're looking for? We're looking to go down, right? So the perspective for this chart changes. What is the perspective here? It means that this line right here is the least that we can do. Any changes in the system will go up or above the line. Okay? So that's for the best case. This is how is the law. And this is one of the things that makes this reference very interesting, is that you're going to find along the book many laws. And a lot of the laws that are described there are essentially for flow. We have laws of flow, laws of variability. Okay? So whenever you see law over there, it's something that is important to remember. These are based on Little's law and the concepts that Dr. Song explained to you earlier. So the best case law means the minimum cycle time, or what is the acronym CT best, for a given width level, W, we have the critical width, W0, is given by this relationship. It's either equal to raw processing time when the given inventory is less or equal than the critical width. Otherwise, it's going to be given by this relationship. W is Inventory divided by bottleneck, or bottleneck rate, over here, the number. So here's where it comes important. If we are in that line that it's going up, let me go here, right here. So this is the first case, right? Where is the bottleneck? That's RB. So as soon as we get to the bottleneck, it becomes a straight line. Is that okay? So that's the first formula, the best case. So that's in regards to the time. What happens to throughput? Throughput is going to have a relationship where inventory divided by the time, raw processing time, if the inventory is less or equal than the critical WIP. Otherwise, it's going to be that. Okay? So these two important relationships are derived from the very same. So we say this is little slow. We're focusing WIP and cycle time. So the importance of these relationships is that we always want this to go up, and this is the best case scenario that we can face here. Now, there's like 10 minutes. I probably will skip some of the details if that's okay.
That's great. What we can do is this. What is, go on, you can skip that. No, don't show the pictures here. What is